So, welcome everybody to 2024. This is the architecture meeting for Ortelius and Emporous. Um, Let me go ahead and don't really have a lot on the agenda. We just got to get back into the swing of things. So, um, let's me just share my screen real quick. All right. Like I said, not a lot going on. Go ahead and add your name to the doc. And do we have anybody from the Emporous side? No, it does not look like we have anybody from Emporous. So really no update there. I know Alex has been busy with figuring out some of his data models um, and getting his uh, the GraphQL figured out. I think that was the last part that he had on his list was for a POC was to go ahead and get um, the data models. So when you dynamically add a schema, that the GraphQL will go ahead and get updated automatically. So I know that was one of the things he was working on. On the Ortelius side, just make sure that you go out to the projects and pick up an issue. So everything's going to be listed off the main Ortelius repo. And actually, you can get to it from, you'll see the issues here. I have a Docker build running, so it's running a little slow. But anything with the bounty, you can get paid for, and we have the good first issues selected. Also, you can look at either the milestones or the projects. So if we go back up to the Ortelius level, if you're looking for something to pick up, you can go to the projects. And we could look like the Emporous, I mean the Ortelius releases. And you can see that we broke them down by whether front end, back end. Administration is just kind of like the overall DevOps piece. The core side is all the back end stuff. And then the stuff around the database that we have going on. Those are like the four major categories in the coding. As you saw, there was the outreach project as well. So there's things out there that we need to do on the outreach side. And this is going to include blog posts, administration things like getting a wiki entry out there for Ortelius. So if anybody's a Wikipedia guru, we can start working on an Ortelius submission for that. It can be pretty tricky on those because you have to have so many citations and things like that. But go ahead and grab one of these if you're interested in any of that stuff as well. From the architecture point of view, things are moving along pretty good. We've been able to get basically the SBOMs coming in from the pipeline, storing them in the Arango database, and then taking that data and rendering it in the UI. So the UI component for component details and some of the other versioning data is some of the stuff that we can go ahead and grab and display. So that's coming along. I know Sasha had on his list to build out a Pulumi program to go ahead and like create the kind cluster and stuff like that. There are Helm charts out there, um, and some of them are still being worked on. You can see that this one's in progress as well. So we're getting close to having things pulled together so we can actually start kind of kicking the tires and walking through and seeing what we need to do for changes. One of the things that we may want to start doing on these calls is kind of doing like a UI review. And I can send out screenshots ahead of time for folks to go ahead and kind of review and kind of critique what they have going on the UI front, so we can kind of do a group collaboration on the look and feel and navigation and stuff like that. One of the things that we talked about last year was using, I believe it's called Zero Stack, to share the Arango database, so everybody doesn't need to go and try to gather data. Since I do that for my development, the thought is I can share my Arango database to everybody, so you can actually run the Helm charts locally in the Kind cluster and point over to my database over Zero Stack. And that way you have live data to work with instead of trying to load database to load the data into the database on your own. So I'll put that on my to-do list, is to look at how we need to set up the Zero Stack for the database sharing.
So are we going to find the time this year to talk about, non-functional topics like if you're going to deploy Ortelius, what does it look like? And what's the expected availability of an Ortelius instance?
Yeah, that one's interesting because I think we should address those types of non-functional items. Um, some of the things, like you said, on how we do those things, I think we going to need not only the non-functional items, but also to understand who our audience is. Because I think we have two types of folks for our audience that will kind of direct those discussions a little bit, down different paths. So we have the folks that would want to just kick the tires type of scenario, and then we want folks that are actually going to want to run it in more, development and production environments. So
That is typically something you do cover in an architecture is who's going to consume this? Because those would probably be, kick the tires and in production, or we have to at least consider, is that a separate fork? Is it a separate deployment model or something else?
right, and I think in general, the deployment model is going to be pretty much the same. It's just going to be whether you're going to deploy locally, like on your laptop using a Kind cluster for kind of kick the tires, or if you're going to go into an AWS environment, that you could either kick the tires there, or it could be a production environment. So the process of the deployment is pretty much pretty close to being the same. Just a couple parameters change, and that's in the installation documents. We break out all the different levels of where you want to deploy to. I think what we need to do is, like you said, Tony, break those out in the architecture document and expand upon that in that document about those non-functional areas.
Yeah, because if we're trying to do a 6 nines of availability, that typically requires a very different design than if we're saying, 9 to 5, 5 days a week availability.
Yep, exactly. And that gets into, and we haven't gotten to that point yet with the new database of running the Arango database and a clustered Arango database and all that stuff across
Mhm.
multiple zones in a cloud provider for redundancy and stuff like that. So that's something that we should definitely take a look at. Let me go ahead and I'll put that on my list as well to start building those non-functional areas out. And I'll probably bug you, Tony, to make sure I've covered them all and not missing out on any of them.
You know where to find me, but the only thing I'd say is that's something that's important to do early, because if you discover that you needed to handle the database connections very differently for high availability, sometimes that's hard to back into.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I know on the blockchain side of things, we have found um, differences when we use DevNet, which is basically the development blockchain environment from XRPL versus the production one. And same thing with NFT storage. The development ones are much slower. And actually, when you get into those scenarios where you're utilizing a slower a database connection, it makes you handle like the UI updates and things like that differently. So having these slow connections really does change things up. Looks like Raj has a question.
Yeah, hi Steve.
Hi.
So I was hoping to get like I was hoping to get assigned a task. Like I noticed there was a bunch of priority stuff.
Yep.
Uh, so I'm good at like Python and databases like SQL and MongoDB,
Okay.
and I've done front end before, like a few years back. I'm just very rusty with that. I'm fine with any task. Like I'm willing to learn.
Okay. Drop your Discord handle in chat so I can grab it, and I will. I'll send you a list of issues that may work for you to start working on.
So going back to the architecture for just a minute, Steve, the other one is you were alluding to is volumetrics. If we're building something to handle 5 requests an hour versus 5 requests a second, that's again very different.
Right. And that'll be something that will, I don't even know how to predict that. We could take some wild guesses out there. We do know from the research that Ukarsh did for the generative AI around updating workflows based on security card information. We know that the OpenSSF scorecard project has about, I think, 1 million or 1.5 million projects using it. So we do know that there's that number that we can work with, that we have to start gathering SBOM information from and things like that, and scorecard information from. Overall, I believe there's 350 million GitHub projects that are out there. So, not all of them are open source and stuff like that. So we do have this range of things that we want to be able to grab information from.
True, but again, are we talking about an instance within, say, one entity? Let's say Department of Energy in the US wants to use this as an evidence store.
Yep.
Talking about one that everything that runs off GitHub wants to use. Now, again, that's a very different design.
Yeah, and that's going to be the tricky part. I think from the design perspective, dealing with those two different types of entities. Now, one of the things that we've always known from an architecture standpoint is the federation of the data. So let's say we can convince the Linux Foundation to run an Ortelius instance that will gather, all the information about all the projects that are connected to this scorecard. So we know we have 1 million projects that we're going to be kind of watching over from the Linux Foundation side of things. And then you have, like you said, like Department of Energy is going to have some small projects or a couple projects that are going to want to do the evidence store for their projects. We'll want to federate the two databases and that information together. So you don't have to replicate all the data from the open source side back into like the DOE side of things.
I mean, in the case of DOE, if you think about the national labs, it'd be thousands of projects. But
Yeah,
I think the other things that have to be considered are, if you're working in open source, sharing is what open source is about. If you're working within an entity like, I don't know, Bank of Albuquerque versus Citibank, they probably don't want to share stuff outside their organizational boundary.
right.
So, we can just simply make some decisions that say, we're designing for this first, but we have a notion that we want to be able to instantiate a much smaller instance. So we want to support GitHub and OpenSSL. Cool. But then if we say, oh, we want to work with, I don't know, Ford, or we want to work with Bank of Albuquerque or somebody, sort of down the scale of smaller and smaller, we need to contemplate that in the architecture early, not late.
Right.
Because you do it late, it gets real hard.
Yeah, and that's kind of the approach that I've been always kept in the back of my mind is that we design for the large and then be able to make sure that that large system design is able to be implemented for, like you said, the smaller companies easily without too much overhead. We don't need to go and for a small company have them run a clustered database that is in every single, running in Japan, running in London, and running in the States for redundancy, where somebody, like you said, a bigger company like a Bank of America or, a Chase credit card company may have to do the worldwide thing.
Yeah, so what I'd say is maybe we can set up a discussion to talk about what are the non-functionals and kind of line up which order we want to take them in, because
Yeah.
if we design something that can run in a single, I mean, Sasha's got a desktop instance.
Yep.
And if we say, okay, if you're small, you can put this on a server, in your shop and you're done. Then if you're larger, you can migrate it to the cloud, and then you can migrate to a clustered cloud instance. I think those are, very, very different cases.
Yep. So it sounds like there's well, we'll have to schedule a call so we can go over those non-functionals.
Okay.
And I will send it out to the Google groups, the invite. What we'll probably target for is a week from today, the same time if that works for everybody.
Hold on. So that
So it'd
would
be
be
the
11.
11th at 9:30 Mountain Time.
Works for me.
Okay.
And I think our objective for that first discussion ought to be, let's enumerate, kind of what are the non-functionals we want to consider and stack them in some priority order.
Yep.
And then we can figure out from there. Because typically availability, performance, and security are some of the big ones.
Yep. And I think figuring out this sizing models, like you said, like Sasha's doing a local desktop, and then what's the next size up? Maybe it is, uh, a on-premise Kubernetes cluster. And then the next size up is going to be, something running on AWS. And then finally get to the biggest level, which would be a cloud provider distributed around the world, multi data center cloud provider type of things.
Mhm. And I think if we use, things like Kubernetes, whether they run it in a public cloud or they run it in their own data centers shouldn't really matter.
It doesn't, from the deployment side, like I said, it doesn't change that much for us. It's just some parameters that we have to. So, for example, when you go into AWS and you want to start scaling things, you end up tweaking more things on the AWS load balancer than changing Ortelius itself.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I would typically say there should be a deployment guide, but the architecture needs to work proper architecture works in different deployment scenarios.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, enumerating those deployment scenarios and other non-functionals will definitely help us out, making sure that what we're implementing is actually, what we're building is actually going to fit into those scenarios.
Yeah, and we can also say, and these are scenarios that we're not intending to support.
Yep. Yeah. All right, cool. Does anybody else have Raj? I got your Discord handle, so I will connect it with you on that and give you a list of. I'll chat with you over Discord and we'll figure out what you want to play with, and if you want to do some back end Python stuff, or if you want to do something else, front end stuff, or the database piece, those type of things.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Okay, cool. So I will put on I will send out the invite for a week from today, and we'll take a look at that piece from the non-functional architecture point of view. Make sure we get all that documented and make sure we're covering all of our bases. Let's see. The only other thing that was on my list is we are going to have. Is anybody familiar with the Allen NLP machine learning? Has anybody worked with any of those Python libraries?
Sorry, can you repeat the Python libraries again?
It's called Allen NLP. Let me bring it up and I can share it real quick.
Oh, is it within PyTorch?
Yeah, it's within. Let me share my screen. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So the Allen NLP is basically a way to use pre-trained models, and we are going to need to use something like this. So there is, when you take data that you collect from your SBOMs and you get your CVEs have a description. But what you need to do is map a CVE to an attack technique. And right now, the only way to do that is through ML by looking at the description of the CVE. So if the description of the CVE just says this is a denial of service attack, you need to go to the MITRE side and look that this is going to be MITRE classifies. They have like 600 different techniques that you can break into a system. And what you need to do is you need to map the CVE to the technique. And to do that, I found somebody that's already created a ML pre-trained model that actually does all this stuff. But the problem is the Python library, the LNNLP Python library, is been put into maintenance mode. So we need to find a replacement for that Python library because it has a bunch of they've moved on to another the AI2 Tango and some other things have kind of replaced it. So that's why I was curious if anybody's worked with this library and seeing how we can move away from that without having to do a lot of work and rewrite a bunch of stuff. So if there's any data scientists out there you know of, I'm to pass along their name to me. I'll probably reach out to Kat and Alex since they've been working with them, and Ukarsh since they've been working with the ML side of things. So basically, I have the stuff working, but it has a bunch of vulnerabilities in it. We kind of need to fix to come up with a different solution as part of that.
Can you share this link?
Yeah, let me drop it in chat.
I will take a look at AL2 Tango.
So I'll actually share this link. So here is the actual program. Let me find chat. And go to everyone. So there's our repo with our working code. But like I said, I started looking at I did a vulnerability scan, and there's vulnerabilities all over the place in the Docker image. And part of it is it's based on old libraries, and the fixes are out there, but it's not possible to bump versions and stuff like that.
I shared the link. That's I think like that works also for the Kubernetes.
Okay, I will. Let me bring that up. Which one's this?
Yeah, this one. Just read its description.
Okay, cool. I will take a look at that as well.
Because we are currently working on it. So if we need any feature, just let me know. We will start making them.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I will take a look at this this repository. Oh, some other things I found out over the holidays. Basically, I've been able to change up our workflows so that when we do a Docker build, we actually have Docker generate the SBOM and also do sign the Docker images using cosign. So those are happening automatically now on our workflows, our GitHub actions. And what that means is we actually can pull the SBOM and basically our signature, our official signature from our Docker images now, which is nice. So we'll be able to, it skips the need to run SIFT as part of our workflows. So that comes in handy. Learning more about that signing process and things like that. Um, and that's kind of like one of the best practices that folks have out there.
Yeah, that's a great news.
I thought it
Because
was going to be more complicated. The dumping the records and getting the verification was a little tricky because I thought it would give more like a your user ID or your name, but it just gives like the GitHub action that actually created that, so your provenance goes back to the GitHub action. So you have a bunch of steps to trace all the way back, but things are being linked together a little bit better using those methods. And it was just basically adding the correct build kit to the workflows and turning on a couple flags. So what that means on the other side of things, when we look at the generative AI side of things, and we want to recommend to folks about how to make their workflows better. A couple lines of updates, add this step and add these flags, and you get these benefits is going to be huge. And if we can do that automatically for folks, and basically run a generative AI to update their workflows and create a PR. Will be a big benefit to folks. But that's down the road. We got to get the step one
we
done
need,
first.
we need one ML and MLOps guy, so
Yep.
he can like create the system design. So then we can start filling the dots there.
Yeah. Well, we have Utkarsh is off at university studying that for his master's, and I don't know if he's going to do his PhD or not in data science, but he is in Oxford doing that. So we do have somebody to leverage on that front. Also, like I said, Kat and Alex from the Emporous side have background on the ML side. I know Alex is doing some generative AI for his side of things.
I can contribute to the ML also. I
Perfect.
am learning the ML ops, not the ML library, so I can contribute in the
Yeah, we'll
workflow
need
part.
that definitely is another area that we need to focus on is the ML ops to make sure. So we have to make sure in our non-functional requirements we deal with machine learning as well. One of the first steps, where we're at right now is we're at the point of gathering data, and we know that this is important data to gather, and then being able to use that data to make everybody's lives better out there.
Yes, we have to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, the the whole process that we have is very manual, I would say. And we definitely, where we're headed is going to make everybody's life easier by automation and visibility. Taking the data, making it visible through the evidence catalog, and then being able to act upon it.
Yeah. Can you create more issues regarding that or regarding DevOps, like the smaller issues?
Yeah, let me. Yeah, I'll try to create some. I don't know how many I'll be able to create, but I'll get some out there. I think what we may need to do, Arvin, is have another working session just on machine learning and AI.
Yeah,
So
that would be
I
great.
say we do this. I say we do a week from today. We'll do the um, build up on the architecture, and then maybe the week after or within the next 2 weeks, get a machine learning and AI working session out there.
Yes, we would need that.
So on this topic, Tony over the holidays came across this article, which I think everybody, or this document that the NSA and the what do they call themselves? The Enduring I want to say ESL, but that doesn't sound right.
ESF.
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 Yeah. The Enduring Software Foundation. I don't know what it stands
Framework.
for. Framework. Thank you. But I would highly recommend all of you take a read of it. One of the areas I think we should be incorporating from that information is the risk assessment. The risk assessments are already out there. I think MITRE produces them. It says in the article where they're produced, where we can get them. We should be bringing that risk assessment information in because some of that risk information is going to really potentially build out some of our ML workflows and our threat modeling. So I feel
Yeah.
like it's something we should do sooner than later, is to bring that information in since we can so easily.
Yeah, and you have to remember, according to JFrog, from the time a vulnerability is found or acknowledged in the world, and the time to a developer fixing it is what, 200 days, Tracy, or
227 days to containment, according to their research, which I still think is outrageous if that's true.
127 days?
227.
227.
See, I
It's
know.
like most of a year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for one.
for one person. So that means you would take a good portion of your staff and put it on there. Hey, Vincent, what do you think about that number?
That's an absolutely terrifying number.
I'm sure that Red Hat does it in 226 days.
Do you think that's a true number?
I'd like to say no, but it's an average, right? Like it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
it'll be like there'll be a number of ones where you have like say Log4Shell and whatever where it's fast. But when you're looking at things like low and moderate vulnerabilities, and it's kind of like, meh, if somebody does exploit it, what are they going to get? It doesn't matter.
Well, you also do reachability analysis too.
Well, there is analysis, right? So there's time in order to figure out what it is that the thing actually does in order to do the an impact
Yeah, but
analysis.
my point, Vincent, is you do reachability too. Great, there's a vulnerability. If it's behind 5 layers of other things.
Yeah. But most people, so if you're look, I'll separate that distinction from say somebody like Red Hat, enterprise open source vendor, to a community component, right? You don't know, upstream doesn't know how that component is being used. So from their perspective, it should probably be based on the component itself. You can't assume added protections. Like you can't assume somebody's running a firewall, for example. I mean, we can reasonably assume that, but I wouldn't make that assumption because there are probably people out there who don't, or other similar types of protections. So you have to kind of do the analysis from a worst case scenario. When it comes to somebody like pick some random Python module that's used, say, in OpenShift for one very specific thing, it's plumbing, right? The odds of that thing ever being exploited are very, very small because there's no way to actually use it because OpenShift itself doesn't use it and it's not exposed to an attacker or an end user. In that case, you could go, yeah, sure, there's the analysis, 5 layers deep. It's not a vulnerability as far as we're concerned in OpenShift, but that's not true for upstream, right? So there's different levels of analysis that need to be done. I think when it comes to that number as an average, what I would probably be looking at from a report like that is basing it on criticality. Because I expect that the critical and important rated ones or the ones with a higher CVSS score, that time is much shorter. When it comes to the lower rated ones, then 227 days doesn't feel out of.
So when I asked Steve Chen about that, I said, was there a particular area that was expressed? And it's exactly what you just said. It's the understanding the inventory, where it's used across the entire organization. So since we're providing that information, we need to get that message definitely needs to get out, that we're tracking the inventory. That's why the name of our company originally was Deploy Hub, because we're tracking everything that's been deployed.
Yep.
And the other thing that you just mentioned, Vincent, is that is being able to assess the criticality of it. So we should be looking at that because those should be built into our threat models, and how we do that, I'm not sure.
Well,
But there's
that's
already data out there that gives that information. And what data can we start? What additional data can we start sucking into the catalog to exploit that information for the
So it's interesting that you note that, because we have like an insights product that runs like on RHEL and OpenShift, and it tells you stuff about vulnerabilities that are present, et cetera, right? Most people just use the CVSS base score, and they improperly use that as a measurement of risk, which it was never designed to do by itself, right? And actually, the CVSS version 4 specs basically call that out. Like, do not use this as a measurement of risk by itself, the base scores, because there's the temporal and the environmental scores as well. Now, one of the interesting things that maybe Ortelius could do is, and I don't know if it can do this already, but like classify the type of deployment or workload, right? Because there's a difference between production and development.
yeah.
So when you're looking at the CVSS score, the environmental metrics, you could actually pre-populate those based on, is this development, is this QE, is this dev, whatever. So you can actually add the second leg to a three-legged stool when it comes to CVSS scores by doing that. And then you could probably use something like Sys's KEV or Metasploit or something like that to assign a temporal score, which is based on the exploitability of a vulnerability, right? And then that way you've got three legs on a three-legged stool that actually you can use that CVSS score as a measurement of risk per deployment. And that might be something interesting for Ortelius to start showing, is you can pull from NVD, or, I mean, my preference is always the vendor's base score, not NVD's, because it's a little too broad. But if you pull vendor or NVD absent a vendor, that base score, add to it the environmental metrics that you can calculate via Ortelius's deployment mapping, and then something to do the temporal pieces, then you actually have an appropriate risk score that you can demonstrate to your users, that you can then prioritize things based on, like, hey, this thing's in production, it has a high base score, and it's being exploited. You need to drop everything and do this right now. Versus this is in development. The base score might be high, but it's dev. Who cares? It's not being exploited. Probably not something you need to worry about right now.
Yeah, so that's actually what we're currently working on.
Okay.
And we're actually using MITRE. The MITRE database has the list of techniques, a list of, I want to call them groups, but basically who is the exploiter
So
is,
the attack framework.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're using the MITRE attack framework, and then you get into the monitoring, the mitigation, and then, like you said, the environment of where these are being exploited through. So that was, and Arvin actually has an issue on his to-do list to add in to what we call an environment, are what are all the mitigations in place for that environment. So if you're in a prod environment, do you have a firewall turned on? Is it running in Linux versus Kubernetes or Windows? Because some of the CVEs that will come through will be for an Android exploit. We're going to exploit the Android attack vector, but our production's running Linux and Kubernetes. So that CVE, that vulnerability can never be exploited because we don't have any of that enabled in our production environment. So we're actually working on that. Like you said, where you need to describe the environment and the mitigations in place on the environment side. And then you say, this was what was deployed to that environment. And then we're able to connect all the dots from the developer's code all the way through to the end. And that score of what do I need to work on do I need to run around and panic, or are we going to have a chill day for a while?
And that kind of stuff is hugely important. Like, starting next week, I think there's a 5-series blog series that I wrote, basically about that, like patch management, right? Because nobody really thinks about the cost to fixing all of these things. And you have like a small number of true criticals, a small number of true importance. huge numbers of moderates and lows, and everybody wants all these things fixed. But I mean, last year and the year before, we're running around 25,000 vulnerabilities all told. Right now, I mean, obviously, some of those are for proprietary software, and other things are, it's not like every single person is vulnerable to 25,000 vulnerabilities. But even from a Red Hat perspective, I don't know what the numbers for last year are, but 2022, across our portfolio, there were 1,600 vulnerabilities that affected one or multiple products, right? Because you use a component in different things.
Mm-hmm.
That's really expensive to fix if you're going to fix every single one of them. So giving customers who don't have that understanding, giving them a way to actually understand it and understand what the risk actually looks like to know whether or not they need to be chasing a fix is hugely important. If I just kind of use a fake figure of $1,000 per vulnerability, it's probably much higher than that, right? But that gets really, really expensive when you're looking at 1,600 vulnerabilities a year.
Well,
only
if you're
maybe
figuring
100 of them matter.
if the cost is going to be huge, because if you're figuring it's going to take 227 days times
Let's hope
what
not.
man hour is, that's like
Well,
50 grand of vulnerability there.
No, well, you can't do that, because somebody's sitting on that till day 226, and they're like, I guess I should fix it. And
There you go.
it takes them an hour, right? But it is, there's the cost to do your own testing, do your own deployment, install the updates, all of these things that every single company has to do. So you multiply this for every single end user of this piece of open source, the costs are astronomical globally. Right.
Oh yeah.
But even the cost to that company itself, when you're looking at all of these vulnerabilities that now I have to do test and deploy and fix and regression testing, and if I upgrade to something, say, directly from upstream, and we know these aren't just security fixes. There's new features. There's new other things that are coming in. So am I introducing a new vulnerability? Am I breaking my code in some way because the assumptions have changed? And I didn't go through the change log and didn't understand all that. Now all of a sudden I have downtime, or I have to revert it and then make changes to my application to account for the changes in this upstream dependency. Like, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And making it easy for them to go, this thing matters, I need to fix this, and I will bear the cost for updating my application because it's that severe, makes it worth doing, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the reports that we want to be able to, once we tie all this together, is to generate a priority report at the high level, saying, I want to look at it from the production environment perspective, or I want to look at it from this application team that has 200 microservices running, or I want to look at it from a common code team. I've written this common code component and it's used throughout the organization. Who am I messing up because I decided to use some bad library or not keep up to date? So that's the type of information that we want to be able to give to not only developers, but also the DevSec guys, the risk folks, to make sure they can make better decisions.
Well, and then the nice thing about that too is you kind of give that fast, early information to the DevSecOps folks. Like, they can be kind of seeing the future, right, for what it is that they have to go and work on for dev to protect that. Like, they can be looking at something, and if there's real time, say, temporal reporting, something pops up on the KEV, and they have like an instant notification that's like, okay, this thing's being exploited, it's used in these places, this is the environment, so on and so forth. And they have that actionable information. They can actually start working on that. Or if they see something that's on Metasploit as a proof of concept, you can infer that an actual weaponized exploit is not that far.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there's things like the Nginx one that came across last year in the fall, where literally the 0-day fix was update your configuration file. It wasn't even a redeployment of. It was basically, well, it was a redeployment of the config file, but not redeployment of applications.
Yep.
That it was a quick win for shutting down the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and that's actually an awesome thing as well to kind of, and I don't know how you factor this in there, right? But having those kind of like what are the configuration changes that can be made to mitigate it quickly while you're looking at a new updated version of software or whatever and doing all that testing and stuff. So you don't have this window of, I have an updated version, but I haven't tested it yet, but I also have this minor configuration change. I can deploy that and basically stub the exploitation of that vulnerability, even while I'm still kind of making sure that nothing else is going to break with an actual code change.
Yep.
We don't get that option often,
No.
but we get it a lot more in open source than you do, say, with proprietary software, right? So, I mean, it is something that if something like that is present, we should absolutely be trying to tell people about it.
Well, yeah, definitely. And it would be nice in the reports if we were able to figure out how to associate a cost with fixing it. And I don't know how you do that, but if you go to a CEO and say, or a CIO and say, all right, here's your top 10, you know, this one is going to cost you 2 hours worth of somebody's time.
Mhm.
That's going to check it off of the list versus these other ones that are like the moderate list always seem to take the longest to fix because it's going to be somewhere buried in the dependency tree that you have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, if you could crack that nut, that would be amazing because I think would be hugely valuable, but also hugely complicated to figure out.
So there actually is a standard for this. It's from Open Group. It's called Open Fair. I'll stick it-
F-A-R-E.
No, FAIR.
Okay.
And what I'll do is I will put a link to it in the chat here in just a sec. That has got active, there are existing standards, there's a certification process and all that. It's aimed at risk analysis around IT. And there's a project going on around quantifying this to answer that exact question.
Oh, I really want to see that done.
Okay, and for you, Vincent, since you're at Red Hat and Red Hat's part of IBM, you have free access to all that stuff. But the public standard anybody can look at, and I will, like I say, stick that in the chat here as soon as I get to the right spot.
Okay.
There it is. So there is work that, like I say, I think there's thousands of people certified in this today. So it's out there, and there's a description of it you can go have a look at.
Oh, thank you. I'm definitely going to be looking at this.
Well, and as I said, Red Hat counts for Open Group as part of IBM, which means free.
I'll take free. That's awesome.
Paul Holman, who's a distinguished engineer in the UK, is IBM's rep to the board, and I guess he's the guy that's responsible for coming up with the membership fee regularly.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
And is it mostly a process type of thing, or is it actual
It's
coding
process,
changes?
because the people that look at this are corporate risk analysis folks,
Okay.
who are by definition not developers, but they're the ones who have to go explain to, C-level executives why you ought to go spend money on something. And
Got it.
What's the impact of kind of not spending the money?
Mm-hmm.
But there's another project that is just starting, driven out of Australia, that's trying to look at automated tooling to support it. I'm not a total believer in that project yet, but they're trying to talk me into it.
Well, automation around that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's just I think their premises are kind of a little bit not quite right yet, which probably means they're going to ask me to fix it.
That's probably true.
That's one of the dangers of complaining about something, as I think we all know.
Of course.
Can we
You bring up
Can you-
you bring up that something's broke, and then they say, "Well, you go fix it."
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
remind them, guys, I'm really kind of meant to be mostly retired. And they say, yeah, so?
That's
Can
the way
you
it
share
works.
the repo so we can take a look at what they are trying to do?
Yeah, you can grab that. The most they'll ask you for is an email address to get a copy of it. But this has been actually quite successful in terms of adoption and getting people engaged in it. Sorry, I diverted us off a little bit
No,
there.
that ties it all together for us. So
Yeah.
we got a couple minutes left. Anybody else have anything they want to chat about?
So Tracy, I've got one thing to discuss with you if you want to take a second at the end of this.
Sure, no
You can look
problem.
at or you can look at the LinkedIn message I sent you.
Well, let's just chat about it after this is over.
All right, so let me go ahead and stop recording. And thank you, everybody. And be on the heads up for a link for a week from today. Same time, same link, everything. But I will send out a new invite for that.
And that is for the non-functional requirements, correct?
Correct.